The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Legion's parade ground as 12-year-old Emma Richardson walked beside her father, her heart hammering against her ribs with the force of a blacksmith's hammer. She clutched a worn manila folder to her chest as though it contained the secrets of the universe, because to her it did. Inside lay competition certificates dating back 3 years, each one a small victory, each one proof of something she'd always known about herself. She was different. The folder also contained her shooting coach's recommendation letter, typed on official letterhead and signed in bold blue ink. But most importantly, it held her wildest dream, written in careful handwriting on notebook paper, revised 17 times until every word was perfect. Camp Lejeune sprawled across thousands of acres of North Carolina terrain, a place where discipline was the air people breathed, and excellence was the only acceptable standard. Emma's father, Michael Richardson, had served in the Navy for nearly 20 years. He'd walked these grounds in uniform, had trained here during the most demanding period of his life, and had made friends in high places, the kind of friends who could make phone calls that mattered. He knew the base's culture intimately: respect for achievement, a healthy skepticism of outsiders, and an unspoken rule that excellence came from dedication, not luck. Emma wore her best clothes, a navy blue blouse and pressed khaki pants that her mother had helped her select the night before. She'd polished her shoes until they gleamed like mirrors, hoping that attention to detail in her appearance might suggest attention to detail in everything else. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, not a strand out of place. She looked professional, serious, capable, everything an almost teenager could possibly look while internally terrified. "You ready, sweetheart?" her father asked as they approached the administrative building. His voice was calm, reassuring, the voice of someone who'd navigated military bureaucracy for 2 decades. He placed a hand on her shoulder, and she felt some of her nervousness transfer into his solid presence. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in her bedroom mirror, practiced her words, perfected her tone. But now that it was actually happening, the words felt fragile, like they might shatter if she spoke them aloud. The hallway smelled like polished floor wax and military efficiency. Soldiers in dress uniforms moved purposefully past them, each one focused on their mission. Emma caught several curious glances. A young girl in civilian clothes walking through a military facility with a folder and a nervous expression definitely stood out. Colonel James Mitchell's office was at the end of a long corridor, his nameplate on the door in crisp white letters. Colonel James Mitchell, commanding officer. Emma's father knocked, a sharp, professional rap of knuckles against wood. "Enter," came the command from inside. The colonel sat at a massive oak desk, reviewing morning reports with the focused intensity of someone accustomed to processing critical information. He was tall even sitting down, with salt and pepper hair, a square jawline, and the bearing of someone who'd made life-and-death decisions. He was probably in his mid-50s, with the muscular build of a man who still ran every morning and maintained the physical standards he enforced on his subordinates. "Richardson," the colonel said, recognizing Emma's father immediately. "Good to see you. It's been, 5 years?" "6, sir," Michael replied, shaking the colonel's hand. "Thank you for taking the time to see us this morning." The colonel gestured toward 2 chairs in front of his desk. "Of course. Michael's always welcome here. But," he glanced at Emma with curiosity tinged with amusement, "I have to admit, I'm not sure why you brought your daughter to a military base for administrative business." Emma's father smiled slightly. "Sir, Emma has something she'd like to ask you directly." The colonel leaned back in his chair, his full attention now on the young girl sitting stiffly in front of his desk. He folded his hands across his chest, a posture that was probably meant to be welcoming but felt to Emma like the ultimate test of her nerve. "Well, young lady," the colonel began, his tone shifting to that particular register adults use when addressing children, slightly softer, slightly slower, as if talking to someone who might not fully understand. What brings you to my office today?" Emma's mouth went dry. She opened the folder with trembling hands and laid out her certificates on his desk. Her voice, when she finally spoke, sounded smaller than she wanted it to. "Sir, my name is Emma Richardson. I'm 12 years old and I'm a competitive marksman. I've won regional youth championships for the past 3 years. I've trained extensively under Coach Patricia Morrison, who's trained several Navy personnel. And I'm here to ask if I could access the advanced firing range, the one used by SEAL team candidates, to attempt your qualification course." The words tumbled out in a rush, everything she'd practiced emerging in a torrent. The colonel's expression shifted. For a moment, he simply stared at her, as though processing what he'd just heard. His eyes scanned the certificates, proof of achievements, dates, competition names. And then something happened that Emma would remember for the rest of her life. He laughed. Not a cruel laugh, not exactly, but the kind of laugh adults give when they've encountered something absurd, something that defies basic logic. It was the laugh of someone who'd commanded elite warriors, who understood at a cellular level what it took to compete at the highest levels of human performance. It was the laugh of someone who absolutely could not imagine a 12-year-old girl threatening any record on his base. "Well," the colonel said, still chuckling and shaking his head, "I have to give you points for confidence. That's some dream you've got there, kid." He reached over and ruffled her hair in a gesture that he probably meant to be kind, but that Emma experienced as condescension. "Maybe when you're old enough to see over the counter at a gun shop without standing on your tiptoes, we'll talk about you running the SEAL qualification course. For now, maybe you should stick to youth competitions, huh?" The dismissal was complete and final. The colonel turned back to his paperwork, the conversation clearly over in his mind. Emma felt her cheeks burn, from embarrassment, from anger, from the crushing weight of not being taken seriously. But her father simply smiled. Not a smile of agreement, but a smile of absolute certainty. "Thank you for your time, sir," Michael said, standing and gathering the folder. He placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. "Come on, honey." As they walked out of the office and back down that long corridor, Emma wanted to cry. She wanted to throw the folder in the trash. She wanted to give up. Her father, however, had other plans. "Did you see his face?" Michael whispered as they pushed through the building's front doors into the bright sunlight. Emma shook her head, not understanding. "That's the face of someone who's about to be very, very surprised," her father said. "Trust me, sweetheart, we're not done here, not even close." Years earlier, on a gray Saturday afternoon when rain pounded against the windows like impatient fingers, Emma Richardson wandered into her grandfather's shooting range expecting boredom and disappointment. She was only 4 years old, and her parents had dropped her off at his house while they attended a friend's wedding, an event, they'd explained, where children weren't particularly welcome. Her grandfather, Raymond Ray Richardson, had offered to watch her, and Emma had imagined hours of sitting in a boring old man's house, maybe watching television or coloring in a coloring book. Instead, she found magic. The shooting range occupied a converted barn on the back 5 acres of her grandfather's property, just beyond the tree line. Emma had walked past it 100 times, but her parents had always hurried her along, explaining that it wasn't a place for little girls to play. Today, seeking refuge from the rain, she'd pushed open the weathered barn door and stepped into another world entirely. The range was immaculate. 20 shooting stations ran in a precise line, each one equipped with sandbags, target frames, and a small wooden bench. The far wall displayed a collection of rifles and pistols, secured behind glass gleaming like weapons in a museum dedicated to precision. The smell hit her first: gun oil, metal, and something else, something almost like electricity. Targets hung at various distances, some at 50 feet, others at what seemed like impossible distances. Her grandfather stood at the nearest station, a .22 rifle pressed against his shoulder, his breathing calm and rhythmic. He fired a single shot. The crack echoed through the barn, and a target downrange spun slightly as the bullet found its mark dead center. He lowered the rifle and turned to find his granddaughter standing in the doorway, soaked from rain, staring at him with an intensity that seemed unnatural for a 4-year-old. "Emma," he said, smiling, "come in. Don't mind the rain. This is the best place to be in weather like this." Ray Richardson was 73 years old, with silver hair, weathered skin, and the build of someone who'd stayed physically active his entire life. He'd been a competitive marksman for 50 years, had won 3 state championships, and had represented the United States in international shooting competitions. But he'd never pushed his children toward the sport. His daughter, Emma's mother, had shown no interest. His son was too busy with football. Ray had assumed his legacy would die with him. He didn't know what changed that day, but something shifted when he looked at his granddaughter standing in that doorway. Maybe it was the way she stared at the rifle, not with fear or disgust, but with curiosity. Maybe it was something in her eyes, that quality of focus that couldn't be taught or manufactured. "You want to try?" he asked. Emma nodded, still unable to speak. Her grandfather selected a lightweight .22 rifle from the rack, a gun specifically designed for smaller shooters. He led her to a shooting station and spent an hour teaching her the fundamentals: stance, breathing, trigger control, how to align the sights with her eye, how to focus not on pulling the trigger but on pressing it, a subtle distinction that he explained with the patience of someone who'd spent his entire life perfecting these techniques. "Shooting is 90% mind, 10% finger," he told her, kneeling beside her small frame. "Your mind has to be absolutely quiet, like still water. The moment you doubt, the moment you think about anything except the target, the shot moves. Your body follows your thoughts, so we train the mind first." That afternoon, Emma fired 42 rounds. 17 of them hit the bullseye. For a 4-year-old with almost no instruction, it was extraordinary. Her grandfather knew in that moment that he'd found something rare. The Saturday trips became weekly rituals. Every weekend, without fail, Emma and her grandfather would spend hours at the range. While other children played video games or watched cartoons, Emma studied ballistics. Her grandfather, recognizing her potential, bought her books written for adults and explained the concepts in terms she could understand: wind resistance, bullet trajectory, the effect of altitude on air density. The mathematical principles underlying the sport became her obsession. By age 6, Emma had memorized the specifications of every major rifle caliber. By age 7, she could calculate bullet drop at various distances. By age 8, she'd won her first youth competition, not just winning, but completely dominating the field, scoring 37% higher than the second-place competitor. Her mother worried. "Is this normal?" she asked her father. "Is it healthy for an 8-year-old to be this focused on one thing?" Ray smiled. "She's not focused on shooting. She's focused on excellence. The subject is irrelevant. She could be excelling at mathematics or chess or any discipline. She just happens to have found an outlet for what's inside her." What was inside Emma was something her parents struggled to understand. While other children at school played tag at recess, Emma sat alone practicing breathing exercises. While classmates gossiped about television shows, Emma read studies on marksmanship psychology. She wasn't antisocial exactly. She was kind to other children, participated in class, but she seemed to exist on a different frequency, operating at a different speed. By age 9, she'd hired a professional coach, Patricia Morrison, a former military instructor who taught marksmanship to Navy personnel. Morrison was skeptical at first. A 9-year-old girl. It seemed like a waste of her time. But after watching Emma's first training session, Morrison realized she was working with something unprecedented. A child with not just talent, but the mental discipline of a seasoned professional. "I've trained soldiers with 20 years of experience who don't have her focus," Morrison told Ray after that first session. "Where does this come from?" "From her," Ray replied simply. "Some people are born with it, most aren't. Emma is." By age 10, Emma had won her first regional championship. By 11, she'd accumulated 3 regional titles. By 12, She was undefeated in youth competitions across 3 states. Coaches who specialized in working with young athletes marveled at her. Physical trainers noted her exceptional body control and proprioception. Psychologists, when her parents brought her to be evaluated out of concern that something might be wrong with her, found her mentally healthy, well-adjusted, and simply operating at an elevated level of capability. But Emma knew the truth that even the experts didn't fully understand. Shooting wasn't about the gun or the target. It was about quieting the mind completely. It was about entering a state of consciousness where there was only the present moment, where doubt couldn't exist because there was no room for it. It was meditation elevated to an Olympic level. She'd built something rare at an age when most children were still figuring out basic multiplication. She'd constructed a warrior's mentality inside a young girl's body. She'd learned not just to shoot, but to command her own mind with the authority of a general commanding an army. And that was why, when the colonel laughed at her request, Emma wasn't discouraged. She knew what she was capable of. She'd known for years. She just needed the world to catch up to her understanding of herself. 3 days after the meeting in Colonel Mitchell's office, Michael Richardson sat at his kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and a list of names. They weren't just any names. They were the names of people who owed him favors, who respected him, who understood the value of pulling strings when the situation warranted it. 20 years in the Navy taught you that everything was ultimately about relationships, about knowing who to call when you needed something done. His first call went to Admiral Thomas Blackwell, who'd served as Michael's commanding officer during his final tour. Blackwell had retired 2 years earlier and now consulted for the Department of Defense. Michael explained the situation, his daughter's extraordinary talent, her legitimate request to test herself against the SEAL qualification standard, and Colonel Mitchell's dismissive response. "I'll make a call," Blackwell said without hesitation. "But Michael, I need to ask you something. Is your daughter really as good as you think, or is this a father's bias?" Michael took a breath. "Admiral, I wouldn't be asking if I wasn't certain, and I wouldn't be asking you if I didn't believe she deserves this opportunity." The next morning, Colonel Mitchell received a phone call from the base commander, Captain Richard Morrison. It was polite but firm. Captain Morrison had been directed, from higher up the chain of command, to accommodate a request for 1 day of firing range access for a young marksman. The captain understood this was unusual. He also understood that if the request came from high enough, unusual requests became standard operating procedure. "I need you to make this happen, James," Captain Morrison said. "Gracefully, if possible, 1 day, 1 girl, 1 qualification course attempt. Then we move on and we never speak of this again. Clear?" Colonel Mitchell felt his jaw clench. This was exactly the kind of thing he despised: politics intruding on military operations, favors flowing downhill, the perfect meritocratic system being disrupted by connections and phone calls. He wanted to object, to explain that this was absurd, that allowing a child to attempt the SEAL qualification course would undermine the entire standard. But he also understood that when the base commander gave a directive, you followed it. "Understood, sir," Mitchell replied and hung up the phone. Word spread across the base like wildfire, traveling through the military grapevine faster than any official announcement could. A 12-year-old girl was coming to attempt the SEAL qualification course. The reactions ranged from curiosity to amusement to outright mockery. In the barracks, the conversation was immediate and loud. "Did you hear?" One SEAL named Garrett asked his teammates, laughing. "There's a little girl coming to run the qual course. I give her 5 minutes before she's crying for her daddy." Another operator, a veteran named Tors, wasn't so sure. Why would they let her attempt it if she wasn't actually good at something? That's not how the military works. "Politics," Garrett spat. "Her dad probably knows someone. Happens all the time." The gossip grew more elaborate with each retelling. She was a prodigy. She was a publicity stunt. She was a general's daughter. She was there to prove that women belonged in combat roles. By the time the official announcement came down from Colonel Mitchell, a brief memo stating that one youth competitor would be attempting the qualification course on Thursday, the entire base was buzzing with speculation. Colonel Mitchell didn't sleep well Wednesday night. He sat in his quarters, replaying the conversation with the base commander. He'd spent 27 years building the reputation of Camp Lejeune's firearms training program. The SEAL qualification course was sacred ground, a benchmark of excellence, a standard that had been maintained through decades of rigorous administration. And now it was being used as a publicity opportunity. Or so he thought. Thursday morning arrived gray and cool. Mitchell arrived at the advanced firing range earlier than usual, needing to prepare, needing to understand what was about to happen. The range was his domain, his kingdom, and if this girl was going to come here, he would personally ensure that proper standards were maintained. He was checking equipment when he received the notification that his visitor had arrived. Emma Richardson walked onto the range with her father beside her. She'd worn the same navy blouse and khaki pants, her serious outfit as she called it. Her shooting coat was slung over one arm, her personal rifle case in her other hand. She moved with confidence but not arrogance. She looked, Mitchell thought, like someone who had absolutely no idea what she was about to face. The SEALs had begun to gather around 3 o'clock, word having spread that something interesting was happening. By the time Emma arrived at 3:47 p.m., there were at least 15 operators present, lounging against the equipment racks, their expressions ranging from amused to skeptical to openly hostile. Garrett was there, his arms crossed, his smirk already in place. "Well, here she is," he said loud enough for the group to hear. "Should we set up some training wheels on the rifle?" Several operators laughed. Torres wasn't among them. Emma didn't react to the comment. She didn't even seem to register it. She simply set down her case and began the methodical process of preparing her equipment. Her father stood nearby, quiet and supportive, but not intervening. Colonel Mitchell watched, his expression unreadable. He'd seen thousands of shooters come through this range. Most of them approached with nervous energy, with tension in their movements, with a desperate need to prove themselves. This girl moved like she was alone, like the audience didn't exist, like she was simply going through a familiar routine. "All right, listen up," Mitchell said, his voice cutting through the chatter. "We're running a qualification course, standard procedures. No special treatment, no modifications. The targets are the same distance, the time limits are the same, the standards are the same. If she can't hack it, she taps out. If she can, we document it. Everyone clear?" The SEALs nodded, some of them still grinning. A few pulled out their phones, ready to record what they assumed would be an entertaining failure. Michael Richardson squeezed his daughter's shoulder. "Show them who you are," he whispered. Emma nodded, still wearing that expression of absolute calm. She'd practiced this moment 1,000 times in her mind. The range, the distance, the targets, none of it mattered. What mattered was the same thing that had always mattered: quieting her mind, entering that state of perfect focus, and letting her training take over. She walked to the first firing station. The SEALs quieted down, ready to watch the show. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness something that would reshape their understanding of human potential. They were about to watch a 12-year-old girl dismantle the expectations they'd held their entire lives. Colonel Mitchell positioned himself at a distance where he could observe clearly. He had no idea what he was about to see, but something in Emma's bearing, something in the absolute certainty of her movements, made him wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, he'd been wrong. Emma Richardson stood at firing station 7, the position Colonel Mitchell had assigned to her without explanation. Around her, the range hummed with a subdued energy. The SEALs had stopped their usual chatter, but they hadn't left. Most were positioned behind the firing line, ostensibly preparing their own equipment, but really watching this small girl who disrupted their Thursday afternoon. She began her preparation with ritualistic precision. First, she inspected her rifle, a custom-built competition-grade .308 Winchester that her grandfather had purchased for her on her 11th birthday. She checked the bolt mechanism, the firing pin, the scope alignment. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd performed this inspection 10,000 times. The SEALs watched this methodical process with barely concealed amusement. What were they expecting? That she'd point it sideways, that she'd forget which end the bullets came out of. Garrett leaned against a nearby post and whispered something to another operator that made them both smirk. Emma didn't acknowledge them. She was already beginning to separate herself from the external world, to construct the mental fortress that was the foundation of her entire sport. She loaded her ammunition magazine with deliberate care, each round placed with precision, each one making a distinct metallic click as it seated. She'd loaded this exact magazine 1,000 times. The routine was so practiced that her conscious mind could begin to step aside, allowing her deeper awareness to take over. Next came the breathing exercises. Emma closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them and began a 4-count in, 4-count hold, 6-count exhale pattern. Her chest rose and fell with mechanical precision. The goal was to bring her heart rate down from its current elevated state, probably 90 beats per minute, down to the low 60s where her best shooting happened. She'd learned that her hands were steadiest when her heart rate was between 60 and 65 beats per minute, when her body was in a state of almost suspended animation. One of the younger SEALs, a man named Rodriguez, actually stopped what he was doing to watch more carefully. There was something about the way she was breathing, the way she was centering herself, that didn't seem like a child playing with grown-up equipment. It seemed like preparation for something serious. "Command setting up Station 7, Emma said, her voice steady and formal, using the exact language she'd heard at every organized competition. "Ready to fire." Colonel Mitchell, who'd positioned himself at the range control point, nodded. "Station 7, you are clear to proceed." Emma took her position at the bench. The rifle came up to her shoulder with fluid grace, the stock settling into the pocket between her shoulder and neck. Her left hand stabilized the rifle while her right hand positioned itself on the grip. She adjusted her body position 3 times, minute adjustments that a casual observer wouldn't even notice, until everything was aligned perfectly. The scope came into focus. She could see the target downrange, a standard human silhouette at 50 meters. The black circles representing vital zones were clearly visible. She took 3 deep breaths to calm her system completely. With her 4th breath, she began to quiet her mind. This was the essential skill that her grandfather had taught her when she was 4 years old. Not focusing on the target, not thinking about the mechanics, not worrying about the outcome. Instead, allowing all that knowledge to sink into her body while her conscious mind became a still pond, reflecting nothing, attached to nothing. Then she pressed the trigger. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. The recoil was minimal for a .308. Her years of practice had taught her body to absorb and manage the forces involved. Her eyes remained absolutely fixed on the scope. She could see the target. Her breathing hadn't changed. Her heart rate was steady. The target showed a single hole in the dead center of the bullseye. There was a moment of complete silence. Then one of the SEALs, not Garrett, but a different operator, actually whistled. It was a low, appreciative sound, the kind of response humans make when they've witnessed something genuinely impressive. "Lucky shot," Garrett muttered, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Emma was already loading the next round. She didn't celebrate. She didn't pause to acknowledge the hit. She simply continued with the next shot in the sequence, her preparation routine identical to the previous one. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 6 counts out. Trigger press. The second round fired and struck the target. Again, dead center. Again, a hole that could barely be distinguished from the first one. They were so close together. Torres moved closer to the observation rail, his eyes narrowing with genuine interest. This wasn't luck. Luck didn't happen twice. This was something else entirely. By the 8th round, the pattern was becoming undeniable. Emma had fired 8 shots. All 8 had struck within a group so tight that a quarter could cover all 8 bullet holes. This wasn't just good shooting. This was competition-level precision. This was the kind of accuracy that took thousands of hours of practice to achieve. Colonel Mitchell stepped closer, his clipboard in hand, though he wasn't taking notes. His jaw had tightened. His eyes were narrow, focused, analytical. He was a man who dealt with facts, and the facts being presented in front of him were undeniable. "Continue," he said, his voice different from before. Less skeptical, more curious. Emma continued. Round 9 struck the bulls. Round 10. Round 11. By round 15, she'd fired 15 consecutive shots, and 13 of them were inside a group that would have been exceptional for a trained military sharpshooter, let alone a 12-year-old girl. 2 rounds had been slightly off, one perhaps 3 millimeters to the left, another about 2 millimeters high. Emma acknowledged these imperfections internally. She'd felt the difference in the trigger press on both rounds, had noticed the minute deviation in her breathing at those exact moments. Not mistakes, exactly, more like learning opportunities, data to be incorporated into her understanding. The other SEALs had gradually stopped pretending to prepare equipment. Most of them were now openly watching. The expressions on their faces had shifted from amusement to confusion to something approaching respect. Garrett, however, remained skeptical. "She's lucky," he said to Rodriguez. "Give anyone 20 shots and some are bound to group up." Rodriguez didn't respond. He was too busy watching a 12-year-old girl methodically shred the confidence he'd built over 15 years of professional shooting. When Emma fired her 20th round, Colonel Mitchell made a notation on his clipboard. The group was exceptional. 20 consecutive shots with nearly all of them inside a group that measured less than 2 inches in diameter at 50 meters. That was better than 90% of military marksmen achieved on their qualification attempts. And she was just warming up. Emma continued to the next stage of the course. The 100-meter targets, the moving targets, the timed pressure drills. With each new challenge, she approached it with the same ritualistic preparation, the same absolute focus, the same mechanical precision. By the time the sun began to set and cast long shadows across the range, something had fundamentally shifted. The SEALs weren't watching a child. They were watching a competitor. They were watching someone operating at a level of capability that transcended age, that transcended expectation, that transcended everything they thought they understood about human potential. Colonel Mitchell stood silently, his clipboard now filled with notations and measurements. He was beginning to comprehend that he'd made a significant error in judgment that morning in his office. And Emma remained calm, focused, and absolutely certain of what she already knew about herself. By the time Emma transitioned to the advanced stages of the SEAL qualification course, word had spread across Camp Lejeune like an electrical current jumping from mind to mind. The base's communication system, a network of text messages, radio chatter, and old-fashioned word of mouth, functioned as efficiently as any military intelligence apparatus. A 12-year-old girl was demolishing records at the firing range. Soldiers who had nothing to do with firearms training began finding reasons to walk near the advanced range. Officers who'd been in meetings excused themselves to observe. Even a few senior enlisted personnel who usually maintained a rigid distance from competitive shooting found themselves drifting toward the observation area. Emma was now 3 hours into the qualification course. She'd completed the precision stage where she'd fired 60 rounds at fixed targets at various distances. Her overall group measurement for that stage was 0.89 inches, an extraordinary number that meant nearly every single shot was landing in a cluster smaller than a silver dollar. Colonel Mitchell had personally verified the measurement twice, because the first result seemed impossible. "How is this possible?" he'd muttered, his skepticism finally cracking open completely. Now came the intermediate stage, the moving target course. This was where shooters separated themselves from the merely good and entered the territory of the elite. The targets moved on mechanical rails, appearing suddenly, moving at variable speeds, disappearing at unpredictable intervals. The shooter had to track the movement, predict where the target would be, and fire with precision while everything was in motion. Even experienced SEAL operators typically saw their accuracy drop by 15 to 20% on this stage. Emma approached the firing position with her now familiar ritual: 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 6 counts out. The first target appeared, sliding across her field of vision at what she estimated to be approximately 6 miles per hour. Her breathing remained synchronized with her heartbeat. Her focus was absolute. The rifle tracked the target smoothly, her body moving as a unified system. She pressed the trigger when the target's center mass aligned perfectly with her crosshairs. The target showed a hit in the center. Perfect. The next target emerged from the opposite direction, moving faster. Emma's body adjusted automatically, her spatial awareness compensating for the increased speed. Another perfect shot. Then 3 targets appeared simultaneously, each moving at different speeds. This was the kind of scenario designed to break concentration, to cause panic, to force choices. Which target to shoot first? Which to ignore? Emma's grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. The mind must be quiet. She made her decision without conscious deliberation. The rifle came up, she fired. The first target stopped its motion with a clean center hit. Her hands worked the bolt action with practiced efficiency. The second target, fire, hit. The third target. Garrett had moved to the front rail, his arms still crossed, but his entire posture changed. Tors stood beside him, both men watching with the intensity of people witnessing something they knew they'd be talking about for years. "Dear God," Tors whispered. The moving target stage concluded. Emma's accuracy percentage, 98.2%. The previous SEAL record was 94.3%, set 5 years earlier by an operator named Jackson, who was now considered one of the finest shooters on the base. Jackson stood in the observation area, watching this unfold, and he was smiling. Not a smile of mockery or defensiveness, but a genuine smile of recognition. He understood what he was seeing. He understood that he was watching someone operate at a level he would probably never reach, and instead of feeling threatened, he felt something like relief. Relief that excellence existed in this pure form, that the human potential he'd always believed in was being validated right before his eyes. The next phase was the pressure stage. Timed drills where accuracy had to be maintained at high speed while the clock worked against the shooter. In standard military training, the goal of the pressure stage was to get soldiers comfortable with shooting quickly without completely sacrificing accuracy. Most operators could shoot all the targets, but their groupings suffered significantly when time was a factor. Emma approached this stage with the same focus she'd maintained throughout the afternoon. "Pressure stage beginning," Colonel Mitchell announced. His voice had changed. It was no longer skeptical or reluctant. It was the voice of someone officially documenting an important event. 50-meter target bank, go, Mitchell called. The first buzzer sounded. Emma had 40 seconds to hit 10 separate targets at 50 meters, each target requiring only 1 shot. Her rhythm was smooth: shoot, move, acquire new target, shoot, move, acquire new target. Her hands seemed to move independently from her conscious mind, operating from muscle memory built through thousands of repetitions. 40 seconds elapsed. All 10 targets showed clean hits. Her time was 33 seconds. The distance markers moved back, now 75 meters. The targets were smaller, the wind resistance slightly different. Emma's breathing pattern adjusted microscopically. 40 seconds on the clock. Go. Again, all 10 targets, clean hits. Time 34 seconds. At 100 meters, where even trained sharpshooters could expect to miss 1 or 2 targets, Emma achieved 10 hits in 36 seconds. The base had gone quiet. The entire observation area, now numbering over 30 military personnel, stood in absolute silence. They were witnessing the systematic dismantling of every expectation, every assumption, every belief they held about human performance. Colonel Mitchell was no longer making notes. He was simply watching, his clipboard hung at his side, forgotten. The final stage was the ultimate pressure scenario, the complex tactical drill. This involved moving through a course, engaging targets from different positions, shooting while standing, kneeling, prone, and moving. It was designed to simulate combat conditions as closely as possible while maintaining safety protocols. Emma moved through the course like water flowing downhill, fluid, efficient, inevitable. From standing position, 4 targets, 4 hits. Transition to kneeling, 3 targets, 3 hits. Prone position, 5 targets. This was the difficult one, requiring a complete body repositioning, 5 hits. Moving drill while firing, 6 targets, 6 hits. The timer stopped. For a moment, no one moved. It was as though the entire military installation had drawn a collective breath and was holding it. Then Colonel Mitchell walked out to the target collection area. He wanted to personally verify the results. He needed to see with his own eyes that the targets actually bore the evidence of what everyone had just witnessed. When he returned 5 minutes later, his expression had fundamentally changed. He was no longer looking at a child. He was looking at a competitor, an athlete, a performer operating at an elite level. "The preliminary scores," Mitchell announced, his voice carrying across the range, "show a combined accuracy rating of 97.8% across all stages. The previous SEAL course record is 94.1%, set in 2015. The words hung in the air like they weighed something. "This represents," Mitchell continued slowly, as if speaking to himself as much as to the assembled personnel, "the highest qualification score ever recorded on this course, regardless of operator experience level or training background." One of the younger SEALs actually started to applaud. Rodriguez joined in. Within seconds, nearly all the military personnel present were clapping, not mockingly, but with genuine respect for someone who just achieved something remarkable. Emma stood quietly, allowing the recognition to wash over her without reacting. She'd always known she was capable of this. It was simply the world's turn to catch up. Michael Richardson felt tears in his eyes, watching his daughter receive the acknowledgement she'd earned through years of dedication and discipline. Colonel Mitchell walked directly to Emma and extended his hand. "Young lady," he said, his voice steady and sincere, "you have my complete respect." Sun had descended toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that seemed almost unreal in their intensity. Camp Lejeune's advanced firing range had taken on a different character in the fading light, less like a military facility and more like hallowed ground, a place where something significant had occurred and would be remembered. Colonel James Mitchell stood alone with Emma Richardson as the other military personnel gradually dispersed. Some lingered, reluctant to leave, as though departing the range might somehow diminish the experience they just had. Eventually, they drifted away in small groups, their conversations animated, their usual military decorum relaxed by the extraordinary nature of what they'd witnessed. Mitchell looked at Emma, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. He was seeing not a child, but a person who'd proven something to him that he'd needed to learn. "Emma," he said, his voice carrying a quality of genuine humility, "can we talk for a moment?" They walked to a quiet area of the range, away from the equipment and targets. The wind had died down and the air was cooling as evening approached. Mitchell sat on a bench and gestured for Emma to join him. For a moment, they sat in silence, the colonel seemingly searching for words. I owe you an apology, he finally said. His hands, strong and weathered, rested on his thighs. This morning when you came to my office, I laughed at you. I treated your request with contempt. I thought you were wasting my time, or worse, that someone was using you for publicity. I was wrong. Emma listened without interrupting. She understood that the colonel needed to say these words, needed to process his error in judgment. What I witnessed today, Mitchell continued, is the finest shooting performance I've seen in my 30-year career. And that includes elite military operators, civilian competitors, world-class marksmen. What you did today wasn't good. It was transcendent. He paused, studying her profile as she gazed out at the range. I have to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. How did you develop this? What makes you different? You're 12 years old. You should be worried about school and friends and normal childhood things. Instead, you're breaking SEAL qualification records. How? Emma took a moment before responding. When she spoke, her voice was calm and thoughtful, carrying a maturity that seemed to belong to someone twice her age. My grandfather told me when I was very young that shooting is 90% mind, 10% finger, Emma said. I believed him, I still do. Most people approach shooting or anything difficult with doubt. They're thinking about all the ways they could fail. They're afraid. That fear makes their hands shake. It makes their breathing irregular. It breaks their focus. She turned to look at the colonel directly. I decided early that I wouldn't do that. When I'm at the range, my mind is empty of fear. It's empty of doubt. It's empty of everything except the present moment. I'm not thinking about missing the target. I'm not thinking about what happens if I do poorly. I'm not even thinking about hitting the target. I'm just present. And my body, which has practiced these movements 10,000 times, knows exactly what to do. Mitchell listened with the full attention of a man who understood he was hearing something important. Other people practice to get better, Emma continued. I practice because practice is where I'm actually living my life. I don't practice to be able to shoot well. I shoot well because practicing is how I spend my time. It's the difference between viewing discipline as something you do to achieve a goal and viewing discipline as the goal itself. The colonel was quiet for a long moment, processing this philosophy from a 12-year-old girl. That's remarkably mature, he said finally. Maybe, Emma replied, but I didn't come here to be mature. I came here to shoot. And to prove something to myself, not to anyone else. When I walked into your office this morning, I wasn't nervous about whether you'd say yes. I was nervous that you might say yes, but that I wouldn't be able to back it up. That was the fear I had to manage. Mitchell smiled, a real smile, not the condescending expression he'd worn that morning. Well, you certainly backed it up, he said. In fact, you didn't just meet the standard. You exceeded every expectation I could have possibly had. The way you moved through those different scenarios, the way you transitioned between positions, the way you maintained perfect form even in high-stress situations. It was like watching someone who's been doing this professionally for decades. He stood up and extended his hand formally. Emma Richardson, on behalf of Camp Lejeune and the United States Navy, I want to offer my sincere congratulations and my profound apologies for my earlier dismissiveness. Emma stood and shook his hand. Her grip was firm, her eye contact steady. Thank you, Colonel, but the apology isn't necessary. You gave me exactly what I needed, skepticism. You made me prove myself. That's more valuable than automatic acceptance would have been. As they walked back toward the administrative area, Mitchell found himself asking more questions. How long had she been training? What was her daily routine? Had she ever considered pursuing this at a higher level? Had she thought about competitive shooting at the national or international level? Emma answered each question with the thoughtful precision she'd applied to everything else that day. My grandfather started teaching me when I was 4, she said. I train for about 4 hours every day, 6 days a week. I study ballistics theory, wind patterns, and shooting psychology. I've won 3 regional youth championships. As for the future, I'm not sure yet. Right now, I just focus on being better tomorrow than I was today." When they reached the administrative building, several other officers were waiting, Captain Morrison among them, along with a few senior enlisted personnel who'd heard about the extraordinary performance. "Colonel," Captain Morrison said, approaching with clear interest, "I'm hearing remarkable things about today's qualification course. Is the young lady available for a brief commendation?" Mitchell nodded, and within minutes, Emma found herself being formally recognized by base leadership. It was low-key, nothing extravagant, but it was official acknowledgement of her achievement. A certificate was issued. Handshakes were exchanged with senior officers. The base commander himself appeared briefly to express his respect. Through it all, Emma remained composed. She accepted the recognition with grace but without self-aggrandizement. She understood that she'd accomplished something significant, but she also understood that this was just one moment, one performance. The real work would be what came next. As the sun finally disappeared below the horizon, and the sky deepened to navy blue, Michael Richardson found his daughter sitting on a bench overlooking the range, now empty and quiet. "I'm proud of you," he said simply, sitting beside her. "I know," Emma replied, "but more importantly, I'm proud of me." The colonel, observing from a distance, saw father and daughter silhouetted against the darkening sky. He realized that what he'd witnessed today wasn't just about shooting accuracy or military records. It was about a young person who'd committed completely to excellence, who'd built an unshakable belief in herself, and who'd used that to transform the expectations of everyone around her. And it had all begun with a laugh that morning, a laugh that had underestimated her. Mitchell hoped he'd learned the lesson. News of Emma Richardson's achievement at Camp Lejeune traveled through military channels with the speed of an electronic signal bouncing between satellites. Within 24 hours, Colonel Mitchell's official report had reached the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. Within 48 hours, it had reached the offices of the Navy's Firearms Instruction Program. Within 72 hours, it had reached the desk of Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, one of the most accomplished competitive marksmen in the entire United States Navy. Sarah Chen read the report twice, then a third time, her eyes lingering on the accuracy percentages and record-breaking scores. She'd spent 23 years in competitive shooting. She'd won 3 national championships. She'd represented the United States in international shooting competitions. She'd trained thousands of Navy personnel, and in all that time, she'd never seen scores like the ones documented in Mitchell's report. "This can't be real," she said to herself, sitting alone in her office at the Naval Postgraduate School. But the official documentation was clear. The scores were verified by Colonel Mitchell himself. The witness signatures were legitimate. This 12-year-old girl had genuinely achieved what the report claimed. Sarah Chen made a decision. She picked up her phone and called Colonel Mitchell directly. "Colonel," she said when Mitchell answered, "this is Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen from the Naval Postgraduate School. I've reviewed your report on the Richardson Girls Qualification Course performance. I need to know, is she available for mentorship? And would her family be interested in advanced training opportunities?" What followed was a conversation that would fundamentally alter Emma's trajectory. Sarah Chen wasn't just offering casual coaching. She was offering to personally mentor a young person who demonstrated extraordinary potential. She was offering access to resources, equipment, and training facilities that most competitive shooters would dream about. She was, in essence, offering to shepherd Emma's development into whatever level of excellence she might ultimately achieve. Within a week, Emma and her father received an official invitation to participate in the Naval Postgraduate School's Advanced Youth Marksmanship Program, a program that had never existed before, created specifically for Emma's situation. The first morning that Emma arrived at the Naval Postgraduate School's state-of-the-art shooting facility, she felt something she rarely experienced: genuine awe. The facility was extraordinary: 20 individual shooting stations, each equipped with advanced targeting systems, ballistic computers, and equipment that represented the cutting edge of competitive shooting technology. Sarah Chen stood waiting for her, and Emma's first impression was that here was someone who understood excellence at a cellular level. "Emma," Sarah said, extending her hand, "I'm Sarah Chen. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your performance at Camp Lejeune was remarkable." Emma shook her hand formally. "Thank you, Commander. I'm honored to be here." Sarah smiled. "I've been shooting competitively for 20 years, Emma. I've trained thousands of military personnel. I have to tell you honestly, I've never seen anything like what you accomplished. It's like watching someone who was born for this." Over the next weeks, Sarah became more than just a coach. She became a mentor, a guide, and someone who could understand Emma's experience in a way that others couldn't. They worked together on technical refinements, adjusting Emma's stance at different distances, experimenting with different breathing patterns for varying environmental conditions, studying how temperature and humidity affected bullet trajectory. But more importantly, Sarah helped Emma understand that reaching the highest levels of performance required more than just technical skill. It required study. It required understanding the psychology of competition. It required learning from other competitors and coaches. It required building a network of people who understood excellence at the highest level. "You're good because you've been dedicated," Sarah told Emma during one training session. "But to become truly exceptional, to reach the level where you're competing against the best shooters in the world, you need to learn from people who have been at that level. You need to understand how champions think, not just how they shoot." Sarah introduced Emma to advanced competitors, to military shooting specialists, to psychologists who worked with elite athletes. Each introduction opened new doors, provided new perspectives, and expanded Emma's understanding of what was possible. Colonel Mitchell, meanwhile, became Emma's champion within the military establishment. He attended her training sessions whenever his schedule permitted. He advocated for her access to military facilities. He wrote letters of recommendation to competitive shooting organizations. He became the bridge between the young girl with extraordinary talent and the institutional structures that could support her development. "Emma represents everything we should be developing in our young people," Mitchell told other military leaders. "She has discipline, she has focus, she has the ability to perform under pressure, and she's shown that age is irrelevant when it comes to excellence. I believe we have a responsibility to support her development." The other soldiers at Camp Lejeune had changed their relationship with Emma as well. Garrett, the SEAL who'd initially mocked her, actually requested to observe her training sessions. Torres brought his daughter to meet her, hoping the young girl might inspire his own child to pursue something challenging. By her second month of mentorship with Sarah Chen, Emma had won another regional championship, this time against significantly older competitors. By her third month, she'd been invited to participate in a national youth shooting competition, an honor typically reserved for much older competitors. The transformation in how people treated Emma was subtle but profound. She was no longer a curiosity or a novelty. She was recognized as a legitimate competitor, an athlete operating at an elite level, someone worthy of serious consideration and respect. Emma's daily routine became more sophisticated. In addition to her shooting practice, now expanded to 6 hours daily, she studied advanced mathematics to better understand ballistics calculations. She trained with physical therapists to maintain the muscular control necessary for precision shooting. She worked with sports psychologists to develop mental techniques for managing pressure and maintaining focus in high-stress situations. Sarah Chen observed Emma's capacity for learning with genuine amazement. "I've worked with Olympic shooters who didn't have your dedication," she told Emma. "You approach this sport like it's a spiritual practice, not just a skill to master." "Isn't that what excellence requires?" Emma responded simply. One afternoon, About 4 months into the mentorship, Sarah asked Emma a direct question. "Emma, what are your goals? What do you see yourself doing at the highest levels of shooting?" Emma considered the question carefully. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "A year ago, I just wanted to prove myself on the SEAL course. Now that I've done that, the landscape has changed. I see possibilities I didn't see before, but I'm not going to chase anything. I'm just going to keep showing up, keep training, keep learning. The goals will reveal themselves." Sarah smiled at this answer. She'd worked with many ambitious shooters who had grandiose goals and limited follow-through. Emma was different. Emma's goal was simply to be better tomorrow than she was today, and from that simple principle, everything else seemed to flow. When Michael Richardson picked his daughter up from the Naval Postgraduate School that afternoon, he could see the subtle but significant changes in her. She was more confident, more knowledgeable, more certain of her path. But she was also humbler, having been exposed to shooters and competitors operating at levels even beyond what she'd already achieved. "How was today?" he asked as she climbed into the car. "Commander Chen introduced me to the man who won the Olympic gold medal in shooting 3 years ago," Emma said. "He told me that my approach to mental discipline reminds him of himself when he was younger. He invited me to attend a training camp in Colorado next summer." Michael reached over and squeezed his daughter's shoulder. "You're opening doors for yourself that most people don't even know exist," he said. Emma nodded, looking out the window at the California landscape passing by. "Actually, I think I'm opening doors for other people too," she said quietly. "Commander Chen told me that because of my success, 3 other young girls have signed up for the youth marksmanship program. They said seeing me succeed made them believe they could do it too." 2 years had passed since that afternoon at Camp Lejeune when Colonel Mitchell's laugh had echoed across his office, and Emma Richardson had walked out with a quietly determined expression. Now, standing on the podium of the National Youth Marksmanship Championship in Fort Benning, Georgia, 14-year-old Emma held aloft her 3rd consecutive national trophy. The audience, a mix of competitive shooters, military personnel, coaches, and family members, erupted in applause. Emma stood motionless for a moment, allowing the recognition to wash over her, before stepping back from the podium with the same composed grace that had become her trademark. She was taller now, stronger, more poised. 2 years of intensive training had physically and mentally transformed her, but the fundamental essence remained unchanged. Absolute focus, unwavering discipline, and a belief in herself that was unshakable. After the ceremony, as she made her way through the crowd accepting congratulations, Emma was approached by a young girl, probably no more than 8 years old, with her mother close behind. "Are you Emma Richardson?" the girl asked, her voice trembling slightly with nervousness. "I am," Emma replied, kneeling down to eye level with the child. "What's your name?" "I'm Jessica. I started shooting because of you. I watched a video of you competing and I thought, if she can do that, maybe I can try it too. My mom enrolled me in the youth program at our local base, and now I've won 2 regional competitions." Emma felt something shift in her chest, a sensation she'd come to recognize as the profound responsibility of being a role model. "Jessica, that's wonderful," Emma said sincerely. "Keep training, keep believing in yourself. That's all there is to it." Jessica's mother stepped forward. "Ms. Richardson, I just want to thank you. My daughter has struggled with self-confidence her entire life. Since she started shooting, she's transformed. She's more focused in school. She's more disciplined. She's become the person she always had the potential to be. You showed her it was possible." Emma stood and shook the woman's hand. "Thank you for sharing that. But honestly, I didn't do anything. Jessica did the work. I just proved that age doesn't matter when it comes to excellence." This interaction, replicated in various forms over the next hours, was becoming standard for Emma. She'd received over 300 letters from young people across the country, children who'd seen her compete, read about her, or heard about her from others, and had decided to pursue shooting sports. Youth programs at military bases nationwide had expanded their youth marksmanship divisions. Competitive shooting organizations had begun creating special Emma Richardson scholarships for young competitors, demonstrating exceptional talent and dedication. The story had expanded beyond the military. Mainstream media outlets had picked up her narrative. News programs featured segments about the girl who'd shattered SEAL records. Magazine articles explored her approach to mental discipline and focus. Social media had transformed her into an inspiration for young people far beyond the shooting sports community. But Emma remained remarkably grounded through it all. Her daily routine was now structured around her sophomore year at Raleigh Academy, an elite preparatory school where she maintained straight A's while training 15 hours per week. She still studied ballistics theory and shooting psychology. She still trained with Sarah Chen, who'd become as much a mentor and friend as a coach. She still corresponded with Colonel Mitchell, who'd retired from active duty but remained deeply invested in her continued development. One evening, during a training session at the Naval Postgraduate School, Sarah asked Emma the question that had been building in her mind for months. "Emma, have you thought about what comes next, after high school? Are you considering the military, professional competitive shooting, Olympic training?" Emma set down her rifle and looked at her mentor thoughtfully. "I've thought about it," she said, "but I'm not making any decisions based on where I think I should go. I'm making decisions based on where I'm being called. Right now, I'm being called to train, to compete, to show other people what's possible. I'm also being called to mentor younger shooters coming into the program. I'm being called to be a voice for girls and young women who want to pursue challenging paths." Sarah smiled. She'd learned that Emma's wisdom often exceeded what one would expect from someone her age. "That's a mature perspective," Sarah said. "It's the only perspective that makes sense," Emma replied. "If I chase external goals, Olympic medals, world records, professional contracts, I'll be chasing something that might disappear or change. But if I focus on being the best version of myself and helping others become their best versions, that's something no one can take away." By Emma's junior year of high school, the impact of her legacy had become measurable and significant. The National Youth Marksmanship Association reported a 340% increase in youth program enrollment across the country in the 3 years since Emma's Camp Lejeune performance. More dramatically, 67% of the new youth shooters were girls, a demographic that had been severely underrepresented in the sport before Emma's prominence. Colonel Mitchell, now fully retired and working as a civilian consultant, attended one of Emma's competitions and observed something that moved him deeply. In the youth division at the national championships, more than 40% of the competitors were female. It was a reflection of a culture shift that had begun with one girl's refusal to accept limitations. After Emma's victory, Mitchell approached her in the competitors' area. "Emma," he said, his voice carrying emotion, "I want you to know something. When you walked into my office 2 years ago, I failed you. I doubted you. I made assumptions based on your age and appearance. That was wrong. But you didn't let my doubt become your reality. And because you didn't, you've changed the trajectory for countless other young people. That's the real victory." Emma hugged the retired colonel, something that would have been unthinkable in their earlier, more formal relationship. "Sir, I didn't change anything," she said. "I just did what I was capable of doing. Everyone else chose to believe what they witnessed. That wasn't my doing." "That's where you're wrong," Mitchell replied. "You showed them what was possible. You removed the excuse of age. You removed the excuse of gender. You removed the excuse of expectation. What you did was revolutionary, even if you didn't intend it to be." By her 18th birthday, Emma Richardson had accumulated 15 national championships, 3 international competition medals, and a wall of recognition from shooting organizations worldwide. More importantly, she'd built something deeper and more lasting than awards, a community of young people who believed in themselves because Emma believed in herself. She'd received full scholarship offers from 3 universities with elite shooting programs. She'd been approached by Olympic coaches. She'd been offered sponsorship deals from major firearms manufacturers. But Emma remained focused on the same principle that had guided her since childhood. Show up, train with discipline, and trust that excellence will follow. In her final year of high school, Emma established the Richardson Foundation for Youth Excellence, a nonprofit organization dedicated to identifying and supporting young people with exceptional potential, regardless of background or circumstance. The foundation provided scholarships, equipment, coaching, and mentorship to hundreds of young competitors. At the foundation's inaugural gala, held at Camp Lejeune, where it all began, Emma stood before an audience that included military leaders, Olympic coaches, competitive athletes, and most importantly, the young people she was supporting. 2 years ago, she said from the podium, I was a girl with a dream and a folder full of competition certificates. I asked for an opportunity and I was laughed at. That hurt, but it also motivated me. I want this foundation to exist so that no young person ever has to feel that their dream is invalid because of their age, their gender, their background, or anyone else's doubt. She paused, looking out at the faces of young shooters, some as young as 7, who'd been inspired by her journey. The real achievement isn't the trophies or records, Emma continued. It's knowing that I showed up completely, trained with absolute dedication, and refused to accept the limitations that others try to place on me. And if my story can help you do the same thing, if it can help you believe in yourself when others doubt, then I've accomplished something that matters infinitely more than any championship. The applause was thunderous, but Emma knew the real work was just beginning. Her journey had opened a door, and now it was her responsibility to help others walk through it. Colonel Mitchell, watching from the front row, smiled. The girl who'd walked into his office with trembling hands and a dream had become a woman who'd changed the landscape of possibilities for an entire generation. And she was just getting started.